Good day and welcome to the Real October Surprise new HHS report proves Obamacare keeps failing Americans press conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to the Vice President of Policy and Economics at Independent Women's Voice, Ms. Carrie Lucas. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Carrie Lucas, and I'm the Vice President for Policy at the Independent Women's Voice. Independent Women's Voice is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and I'm pleased to welcome this morning two healthcare policy experts that work with the Independent Women's Voice to discuss the latest news about the Affordable Care Act and the impact that the law is having on Americans. But first, I'd like to highlight the work that the Independent Women's Voice does to give a voice to all Americans who've been harmed by Obamacare. In 2013, IWV launched MyCancellation.com. This site went viral and generated thousands of submissions from Americans across the country who'd received letters, which came as a costly and horrifying surprise, from their health insurers notifying them that their plans had been canceled due to Obamacare. We knew that the first broken promise stemming from the president's signature law was just that, the first, but certainly not the last, given the law's unworkable structure. IWV wanted to make sure that the American people understood the real damage that this law was doing to their friends and neighbors around the country, and that those people's stories didn't get lost in the statistics. Today, IWV continues to share stories of these broken promises for lost prescriptions, dumped doctors, and affordable insurance rates at brokenobamacarepromises.com. We also work hard to get the facts out so that people know what's really happening with our healthcare system. We host a site called healthreformquestions.com, and this encourages people to test what they know about how our healthcare system works and how Obamacare is working as it's being implemented. IWV has tested the impact of getting Americans this fact-based information and found that it has a significant impact on people's policy and political preferences. You can learn more about these efforts at iwvoice.org. Additionally, IWV created the Obamacare Repeal Pledge that commits members of Congress and candidates to make a clear stand about where they stand on repealing Obamacare. The pledge holds their representatives accountable both to the specific process of repealing this health care legislation, as well as to taking all the necessary incremental steps along the way that will make repeal possible. So far, it has been signed by more than 100 lawmakers and candidates. Now, this morning, we will first hear from Grace Marie Turner. Grace Marie is the president of the Galen Institute, a public policy research organization focused on health policy reform. She's testified frequently before Congress, advised senior government officials, governors, and state legislators on health policy, and written several books, including Why Obamacare is Wrong for America, which was published by HarperCollins in 2011. And then we will hear from Dr. Eric Novak. Dr. Novak is an orthopedic surgeon in Phoenix, Arizona, and chair of the U.S. Health Freedom Coalition. He has also testified before Congress and has been a frequent writer and commentator on health policy issues. So thank you all for joining us, and first we will hear from Grace Marie Turner.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's really a pleasure to be with you and with all of you and Dr. Novak. And thanks to IWF for sponsoring this call. Just a couple of key points. Then Dr. Novak will talk, and we will be delighted to take any questions that you have. First of all, the headline news, I think, really does not tell the full story. The HHS report tried very hard to make it seem as though this was not a big deal to have 25% health premium increases. When we see over and over, and we've seen for the last 5 years, the real impact that this law is having on millions of Americans, and it's only getting worse. One of the things the report does is try to say, well, the premium hikes really aren't that bad because so many people are getting subsidies. Well, only about 45% of people are getting subsidies in the exchanges, and more than 55% are not getting the subsidies. So they are facing the full impact of these premiums. And in many places, including Arizona, as Dr. Novak will discuss, the premium increases are sometimes in triple digits. There is a new interactive map that I think would be interesting for you to see put out by Freedom Partners, and it's www.bustthebailouts.com. They're talking about the reinsurance premiums, the reinsurance payments, the risk quarter payments to insurers. But they've done an interactive map that shows on a state-by-state basis the actual increase in premiums, and you can hover over that map and see, for example, that in Minnesota it's not a 25% increase. It's actually it's more like 60 and 65%. So you can just hover over each one of those states and see where the premium increases really are going. And then finally, Doug Holsaken, who's a former director of the Congressional Budget Office, has an interesting post today at the American Action Forum where he's talking about the impact on taxpayers. And yes, again, many people get subsidies for their coverage, but somebody is paying those subsidies. And the higher the premiums go, the more generous the subsidies are going to be, averaging about $280 per person per month in premiums in 2016. But that number could go much higher. He says just with the increases that we have seen this year, that means that taxpayers are paying out about $32 billion in premium subsidies this year. And if the premium subsidies increase to 50%, this is not the premium the premium increases, but the subsidy increases. He says that tab for taxpayers is going to increase to about $50 billion. So many people are paying in many different ways for these premium increases. And we have a number of personal examples. One of our colleagues, who actually has been pretty open about his experience in trying to apply for health insurance in Virginia, Ryan Ellis, has said that his premiums this year for a family of 5, 40-year-old couple and 3 children, were $750 a month. When he applied for that same plan next year, the premiums are going to double to $1,500 per month, and that's for a $13,000 deductible policy. United Health, that Care First was $1,500 a month. United Healthcare has premiums of only $1,125 a month. That's still a 50% increase. For many people, their health insurance premiums are going to be costing them more, as much or even more than their rent or mortgage payments. So this is something that I think deserves to finally get some attention in the presidential election. Voters have been talking for a long time in any way they can, just expressing their unhappiness with this. And yes, it covers 20 million more people. The majority of them are on Medicaid. And even those who are in the Obamacare exchange plans are finding narrower and narrower networks of both physicians and hospitals, higher and higher deductibles, and higher premiums. This has to be fixed. So, Eric, I will turn this over to you, Dr. Novak, orthopedic surgeon from Arizona. Eric.
Great. Thank you, Grace Marie, and thanks to IWV, and thanks for the people on the call. I'll make just a couple of brief points, if I can, to augment what Grace Marie was talking about. A lot of this in healthcare, which I would say 15 years ago was not a particularly exciting topic, and now is everywhere, is large degree an issue because when the president and the Democrats in 2009 made a case for health care reform, which nobody disagreed was necessary, because at that time, I think the polls showed about 90% of people said health care was too expensive. There were 3 primary promises that the president and the Democrats made. Number 1, that if you had a doctor that you liked going to, you could continue to see him or her. Number 2, that if you had a plan that had coverage that you thought was good for you and your family, you could keep that plan. And the third part was a promise that premiums would go down $2,500 per year. Those of us who at the time were not anti-health care reform but said that the claims that were being made could not possibly be true because they defied all common sense, of course, were called every name possible about how we were not interested in people getting actual health care. The reality is this now in 2016. Narrow networks, meaning limited access to physicians and facilities, is accelerating at a near unstoppable pace. And every discussion I'm in with hospitals and groups is all about narrowing the networks even further, with a alphabet soup of initials to try to hide the fact that ultimately what's happening is that patients and their families are increasingly being treated as pawns to move around because they'll be worth money to an organization. So we're seeing that, and obviously the cost, as everyone has said, is going way up. Yes, of course, there are some more people who have gotten insurance. The numbers, of course, are a bit skewed because the baseline number was at the height of the recession, or the low point of the recession, and also remember that the federal government changed the way they counted who was insured and uninsured, the way the polling was done, which recent studies showed probably has a 1% impact on the overall uninsured rate. So there are a lot of ways in which the numbers have been skewed. So there are some people getting benefit, but I can tell you in my orthopedic practice here in Phoenix, I regularly do see patients who they're just being decimated by the increases under the health care law. The premiums are up, their deductibles are huge, and they really are being forced to make huge, significant life decisions just based upon whether or not they can simply afford to both pay the rent and also pay their deductible. And I think the HHS report, in spite of all of the hiding of the actual facts, doesn't get away from Grace Marie's point that fully 50% plus of all the people being impacted by the law don't get any subsidies, and their premiums are going up. And, of course, here in Arizona, the premiums are going up, in many cases, upwards of 100% year over year to go with higher deductibles. So with that, I'm happy to throw it back to Carrie to see if there are questions to try to get into this a bit deeper.
Now, if anybody has any questions for either Grace Marie Turner or Dr. Eric Novak?
And if you would like to ask a question, please press star followed by the digit 1. If you are using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. A voice prompt on your phone will indicate when your line has been opened. Once again, star 1 to ask a question, and we'll take our first question. Caller, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for a terrific encapsulation of the failures, burdens, and other built-in flaws of Obamacare that are now coming to roost. As someone, and by the way, this is Dan Hayworth, I'm a former physician member of Congress and privileged to be a member of the IWB board. My question is, do you think that this news will reach the voting public in the most important areas, namely, of course, swing areas, in time to make a difference for this election? Do you think it's going to receive enough publicity and have enough impact to, as it should, affect the results of the election?
So
Grace, do you want to go first?
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman, for not only for your call but your service to the organization, and thank you for your question. And as I travel the country, as I'm sure you do too, not only is it suddenly and sort of belatedly, in my opinion, becoming an issue in the presidential election, but it has been an issue in the states really throughout. And I think it's going to play a big role in some of the key swing states, particularly with Senate candidates who are running for election after having voted to put Obamacare over the top. Senator Bayh in Indiana. There are several other members of Congress who are running for a higher office, and they are facing a lot of heat. They're not backing down. They're saying they're proud of this law. Everybody's happy that more people have health insurance, but we are not happy with the way that this was done. And I think that it's when voters have a chance to have a say on this issue, and it's an issue that they are feeling so personally, as many of them are, and as they see these premium increases coming. Yes, I do believe it's going to have an impact, and whether or not it's going to be an impact on the presidential election, that's for the political people to decide. But a lot of polling shows that Obamacare is way up there as one of the top tier issues.
Out here in flyover country, here in Arizona, it is the way it's being presented is merely another example of why an enormous percentage of the country is fed up and losing faith in institutions, because healthcare is in some ways the most personal thing that people have. And to have people coming out from the administration and saying things about the healthcare law and its impact that are so blatantly untrue from their own personal experience merely serves to further the belief that the current people who are the policymakers and implementers are out of touch with the general public. So can I say for certain that this one piece of news will be a deciding factor? I think the more the administration tries to obfuscate in terms of what it puts out there, the more it feeds into the narrative that what's being put out cannot be trusted.
Agreed completely. And it is toxic.
I'd also just say that I think that an issue more broadly as well is that everybody realizes, if you just look around, even within your own family, let alone where you work, or your church, or where your kids go to school, that a very small percentage of people do seem to utilize the vast majority of health care. Most people don't put numbers on it, but everybody who knows that 1% of the population spends 20 to 21% of all the health care dollars. 5% of the population spends 50% of the health care dollars. The flip side is equally important, which is that 50% of the country only spends about 3% of all the health care dollars. And laws like the health care law, like Obamacare, and the increasingly tens of thousands of pages of regulations that have come out of it, adversely and disproportionately affect the huge swath of the country that are only episodic at best healthcare utilizers. If anybody had a good, scalable solution for how to effectively, humanely, and appropriately get the best health care to these high utilizers, many of whom have problems that are just not easily solvable by any system, let alone just the healthcare system, people would do it. And so I think that's another thing that feeds into it when you see the administration put out a paper saying, well, the prices are going up, but a lot of people are protected from it. People just look out their own window and say it is such a disconnect from their own existence.
And it really, it's structural to the plan. The other side is saying in New York Times editorial today that the solution is more subsidies and heavier penalties. The perspective that Eric and I have is completely the opposite, that the pouring more government money into the healthcare system, more taxpayer burdens, having more and more penalties on individuals for not purchasing the health insurance is not the way to go. We need more choices for people of affordable coverage that they want to purchase, that's regulated by the states, not the federal government, which just we are not a one-size-fits-all country. We've got to have more choices and more plans that relate to the needs of people in those states. And that's what the House Better Way plan does. And people say, well, why don't we just keep Obamacare because Republicans don't have any other ideas? Well, they do. They have been working all year long to develop this plan that Speaker Bryan released in June to give people more choices of more affordable coverage, really devolve this down, but continuing to provide subsidies for people who need them, but make those subsidies fair, more equitable, and giving people an incentive to purchase the kind of coverage that works for them. And there are a number of resources. I mentioned a couple of them earlier that I think might be useful to people. And Carrie mentioned healthreformquestions.com. Again, healthreformquestions.com, that is put together by Independent Women's Voice. It's just a lot of data about what's really happening out there in the real world with health insurance. I mentioned the Bust the Bailouts, with an S.com, that has this terrific interactive map that was just released today that shows on a state-by-state basis both the average premiums as well as the highest premium increases. And we also have a website that aggregates important news developments of the day on Obamacare called ObamacareWatch.org. So healthreformquestions.com, bustthebailouts.com, and ObamacareWatch.org could be very good resources for you.
And we do have some more questions. We'll move on to our next caller.
Hello, this is Gregory Twachtman from Frontline Medical News. Just trying to get a little additional thoughts from the doctor perspective, what these spikes in premium mean for the way that you deliver health care and how it affects your ability to deliver health care.
Sure, great. Thanks very much for that question. A lot of these things are trends that have just been accelerating. To a certain degree, I do believe it is important that as patients, because most of us are also patients as well as the providers, do recognize that there is cost associated with care. But if one of the intents of the law was to make some of these decisions more easy for patients and families, the opposite is really occurring. Now, because people are just avoiding. We already know that probably a third of prescriptions don't get filled. In orthopedics, we do send a fair number of people to try to get therapy or might need advanced imaging who then opt not to do it because of cost. And as it goes up, as these deductibles go up, and as the premiums go up, the ripple effect is well beyond health care. If people are spending all of their money on their premiums and then want to save a few dollars just in case their child falls at the park, that is an enormous ripple effect across every part of their lives and across the economy. So I know it's a bit of a vague answer back, but we're seeing it on every front. It has been going on for some time, but it has just been massively accelerating in the last few years. One other point about it, so Arizona is a Medicaid expansion state. A Republican governor and all Republican legislature actually did pass that expansion. And it has been interesting because it creates an interesting set of incentives, and I would almost say anecdotally sort of an interesting set of resentments at different levels, which is you have, since now it's up to about 138% of poverty, or 133 with a fiddle factor, for a family of four, and it creates a lot of resentment for people who are just on the other side of that, because they are spending enormous amounts of their money and income on health insurance, and they see people just below them on the income scale not having to spend anything. And I believe, is actually beginning to have an impact on the way people are making job and life decisions. And I think we'll have to see how that plays out, but I don't think that is something that ultimately is good news for this country or the economy.
Excellent. Thank you.
And we'll move on to our next caller. Please go ahead.
Hi, I am a reporter actually from Arizona, and I had a question for both of you. What do you think is the fate of Obamacare? Are consumers just going to continue to see premium increases? Like, what should should they expect in the coming years? What do you guys think is the fate of this legislation?
Well, when you listen to what the Democrats are saying, they are acknowledging, and they really can't help but acknowledge, that this law has pretty serious problems. And they are going to have to come back to Congress for legislation to move forward. If Republicans hold the House and possibly the Senate, then they are going to have to negotiate, as they did not do before, on the details of how these changes will be made. Secretary Clinton has indicated that her top priority is a public option, basically a government-run health insurance company that would so allegedly compete with private carriers, but with a government-run health insurance program that has unlimited calls on taxpayer dollars, that is not fair competition. And I think that Republicans are very unlikely to pass anything like a public option. The ideas that are embedded in the Better Way proposal to give more authority to states, to give to equalize the subsidies so that they give the individuals an incentive to purchase more affordable coverage, and to relax the mandates and benefit requirements so that people can buy coverage that they want to buy, are going to be on the table for negotiation. So I think there are going to have to be changes to this law so it does not go into a death spiral, the insurance companies. But this time, unlike 2010, it is going to have to be, I believe, bipartisan support. Eric?
I think it's a great question, and none of us, of course, have a perfect answer. I think there's two halves to it. The path that healthcare is going down is no more sustainable today than it was in 2009. Nearly every single promise made by those who promoted and passed the Affordable Care Act has proven to be false. And if they had not given waivers and postponements and other sleights of hand with different provisions in the law, it would be falling apart even faster. So we know that the trajectory is unsustainable. There is not the middle class is being destroyed in this country on several levels, but healthcare is one of the major battlefronts. I would say from a reporting point of view, there's two places to be looking at where things need to change. One is on the actual law, which is what is the basic overall structure. And obviously Grace, Marie, and I believe the folks from IWV as well, would take a position, and I would say it more broadly, that the more we can keep the decision-making, and that includes the financial decision-making, in the hands of patients and families in conjunction with their providers, the better that is for healthcare. The converse being, the more the decision-making is pulled into big centralized decision-making, the worse it is for patient care. So that's the overall structure. The second piece that's often relatively neglected is the regulatory environment, because unfortunately both parties in Congress increasingly create these massive bills that are effectively shells, and they imbue unbelievable authority to control every aspect of people's lives into these regulatory agencies, who then justify their existence with thousands upon thousands of pages of regulations, many of which are self-contradictory. And so an effort, a genuine effort, which is a challenge, to begin to look at that regulatory environment and create an environment where the cost of doing business is lowered for both patients and providers is ultimately in the best interest of getting care. Do I think that will happen? Well, I guess I can be an eternal optimist, but the fear would be, of course, is that however which way the election goes, that political expediency will lean towards throwing just more money at the problem, which will change none of the underlying structural deficiencies.
Thank you.
And as a reminder, it's star one if you would like to ask a question. And we have no further questions at this time.
Well, if anyone does have additional questions following this press call, please contact IWV's Communications Director, Victoria Coley, at victoria@iwvoice.org. And on behalf of Independent Women's Voice, I'd like to thank you for joining us today and to learn more about our work and this important issue, please visit Independent Women's Voice, iwvoice.org.
And that will conclude today's call. We thank you for your participation.